Hey guys, Phylaros here. I've gotten a number of requests for an endgame update to the Titan Autobombear. My character is now level 97, and I've made quite a few changes and upgrades to the build. As you can see, the damage is quite nasty at this point. You just run in a circle on top of Uber Pinnacles and they just fall over. The mapping on this build is something to behold. I truly cannot emphasize enough how absolutely disgusting it feels to map on this build. You absolutely blast through T15s in a way that does not feel like it belongs in POE2 whatsoever. You pretty much just sprint through the map at full speed, blowing up packs 2 screens away. You take essentially no damage because everything is dying past the edge of your screen. You don't care about what map mods you run whatsoever. You can just 6-mod your map and go. This build is temp chains immune. It doesn't care about any mods. You just put the map in and go. I absolutely do not believe that Rampage will make it to patch 0.5 in its current form, so play it while you can. Now, defensively, we've made quite a few upgrades as well. We're now rocking over 4k life, among a number of other defensive upgrades that I'll talk about later. Now, if you are working on more of a starter budget, I recommend checking out the original build guide. That build works very, very well on a budget of about 10 to 20 divines. My current character has over 150 divines invested into it, so this is very much an expensive endgame update. You only follow this setup if you have a lot of currency to work with and you're looking to min-max your character. The original build guide focused on scaling Walking Calamity. The build now centralizes around the Rampage skill. Walking Calamity took some severe nerfs to its single target damage output, while the bug fixes to Rampage made it much more comfortable and reliable to use. We are using Rampage both for mapping and for single target. Now, the original Maul Slam setup is still perfectly fine for single target if you prefer that. I just think running on top of bosses is really funny. It also saves a skill slot because we don't need to run Furious Slam anymore. And lastly, Rampage works very, very well when you're on lower attack speeds because the rate of the slams is fixed. It does not scale with your attack speed or your movement speed. We are now running a Jade Talisman, which has very low base attack speed, which makes Maul and Furious Slam feel a little bit sluggish. Now, my original plans for how to scale the character into endgame involved an armor ES transition, as well as scaling crit, but I actually ended up doing neither of those things, and there's a couple different reasons for that. The first is that transitioning over to armor ES would mean I would have to drop off most of the bottom of the tree in favor of going up to the druid section. And just based on how the character ended up playing out, that just felt really, really unnecessary and even counterproductive, because I would have to drop off most of the movement speed nodes. I have a very, very comfortable amount of survivability as is, so I don't really see the point in going for a transition that makes me map slower. We've got over 4k life at this point, a combined EHP pool of about 5k, because we have a little bit of ES, as well as 15% of damage is taken from mana before life. We've also picked up an Olroth's Resolve, which was buffed in patch 0.4 to last 20 seconds. And every single time we cast Ferocious Roar into Rampage, we have Ferocious Roar on life tap, so it has a little bit of a life cost, which means that I can instantly pop Olroth's Resolve every single time that I roar into Rampage, just like this, and I get around 1700 guard. My Rampage lasts around 20 seconds anyways when I'm at maxed rage, so essentially I've made it a habit of every single time that I do a roar into Rampage, I just hit my Olroths at the same time that I hit roar, and I get 1700 guard on top of my EHP pool of about 5000. So we're running around with like 6500 plus EHP at any given time before Headhunter buffs. All said and done, there's so much EHP that it just doesn't really feel necessary to spec into ES. In terms of armor and armor to elemental damage taken, when we have our scavenged plating stacks up and we are, next to a mob, so we have surrounded up, we've got somewhere in the range of 17,000 armor, over 20,000 to elemental damage taken. Now, this is not like an insane number by any means. It's just kind of like a passable number to pad our defenses. And this is because I don't see the value in over-indexing into defense when I don't get hit. We've got a very comfortable amount already, and based on how this character actually plays out, everything kind of dies off screen as we're running through the map to Herald of Ice explosions, and when you're mapping, the boss just gets heavy stunned in the first second, and it's dead by the next second. So I actually just don't really get hit very much anymore, so I don't see the need to go into some kind of super tank spec with like 50k armor. Now, going over the actual gear and skill gems, I won't go over everything because a lot of it remains the same from the original build guide. I'll just kind of take a look at what I changed. In terms of gear, we picked up a plus 26 Spirit Constricting Command. These are actually incredibly cheap. This one cost me 2 Divines. I was actually shocked to see how cheap they are compared to last league. You can also pick up one with 2 sockets if you prefer, and that also runs about 2 Divines, and that way you can stick in something like a plus 4 Max Rage Soul Core. And this just gives us a little bit of extra spirit to work with so that we could fit in a Berserk Aura as well as some reservation supports. Berserk, you don't have to run. To be honest, this thing is absolutely like an excess of damage. You kill T3 Zesht in like 2 seconds and you're limited by the damage reduction period anyways. If you take off Berserk, it takes like half a second longer to kill him, and it's a little bit annoying to deal with the Berserk degen. So you don't have to run Berserk. It's just kind of like an on paper, it's a lot of damage. I think I've got almost 70 rage with 73% increased rage effect. That's like a 50% more damage multiplier. So you know, the POB nerd in me, it was too hard to pass up Berserk, but this is by no means necessary. You can just run more Aura reservation supports, or you can run Overwhelming Presence or Charge Regulation, something like that. We've switched over to a 5-socket Warrior Invictus. I think this cost me something like 35 Divines. We've got Life, Chaos Res, and Elemental Res. If you're capped on Res, you can pick up something with Spirit instead. And we socketed it with 4 Soul Cores of % max life, as well as one with 15% of damage is taken from mana before life. Now, a 5-socket Warrior is absolutely not necessary. A 4-socket will run you something like 2 Divines for these stats, and you can socket it with just basic Greater Body Wounds for 40 life each, and you're only going to have like 200 life lower than I currently have. So by no means is a 5-socket required, it's just nice to have if you have the currency for it. The reason I'm running damage is taken from mana before life is because this build does not constantly cast anything. We are just turning on our Walking Calamity, turning on our Rampage, and running on top of bosses and mobs. We're not consistently using mana for anything. So it's very, very comfortable to just treat our mana pool as a little bit of extra EHP padding. If you don't have any type of mana leech, or you just, you know, don't want to bother with this, you can just stick in another Soul Core of life. For our Amulet, because we are now using Rampage as our main ability rather than Walking Calamity, we dropped off Fire Flower, which we were just using for cheap Walking Calamity scaling, and picked up a +3 melee skills amulet. The rest of the stats, just look for some life, look for some rarity, resistances. I actually kind of messed up when I was purchasing this. I wasn't paying attention, and I didn't realize it was sanctified. So it has a useless Anoint that I cannot replace, which feels really bad because there's a ton of really, really good Anoint options for this build. So don't be like me. Don't make that mistake. Yeah. Rings, we are still running Pulsar Count, except we swapped one out for one with a Rarity Corruption. I've gotten quite a number of questions about when you can drop off Pulsar Count because I mentioned in the original build guide that you don't have to run this permanently. Personally, when I run Pulsar Count, I just keep it on because it's convenient. It's easy, you don't have to worry about it. But technically, if you scale your build far enough, you can drop off Pulsar Kelm. You would need 2 rings with really, really good cold flat damage rolls, on top of the cold damage that you get from Bater's Vengeance. You would probably have to run Sign Aquo Gloves. You would replace your last socket in Herald of Ice with Freeze, and you would probably even need to pick up a tiny amount of freeze buildup on your tree, maybe with a Megalomaniac, and at that point, you could drop off your Pulsar Kelm. Even then, it's a little bit annoying because if you run into a map with like increased elemental ailment threshold on the mobs, it's still a little bit inconsistent to freeze like blue packs and rares. So I just kind of keep it simple and run Pulsar Kelm. It's not a big deal. If I'm going to be chaining something like T3 Zesht or Uber Arbiters, you can just have a rare ring on swap with a little bit of damage or rarity on it and just put that in over Pulsar Kelm temporarily. So at least for me, I just keep Pulsar Kelm in. Other ring, just damage, life, rarity, resistances. For your belt, of course, once you are able, you just replace your rare belt with a Headhunter. It's by no means mandatory or required for anything. It just kind of multiplies your clear speed once you pick it up because you get a bunch of movement speed perks, area of effect perks. Just feels really, really nice. Gloves, +2 melee skills, as well as some armor applies to elemental damage taken. For the prefixes, you can either go for some flat damage and life, or you can go for a very high armor glove if you want some more defenses, and pick up leather-bound gauntlets in order to basically double the armor that you get from the gloves because we have iron reflexes. For boots, just as much movement speed as you can get. 35% movement speed boots socketed with a 5% movement speed rune. Those I think only run like a third to a half of a divine at this point, and these boots themselves I made for about a divine. Again, look for movement speed, armor applies to elemental damage, some resists, and it's quite nice if you can get some life or high armor on them. I have socketed in my helmet, boots, and gloves. Armor applies to fire, cold, and lightning damage. This is just to get a little bit more armor applies to elemental damage taken, because I lost some when I swapped over to Warrior Invictus. For weapon, we are now running a Jade Talisman base. A Jade Talisman is just kind of the perfect base for this build. It has very high damage, but very low crit and attack speed, but we don't care much about either of those things. We didn't end up going crit because it's just, we're not pathing by very many crit nodes. Garukhan's is really expensive, and crafting a crit talisman is like obscenely expensive to actually get a good one, because there's no easy deterministic way to do it like there is with the current crafting process for a non-crit talisman. It's just prohibitively expensive for not very much upgrade, because we're already basically one-shotting Uber Pinnacles. And from the purposes of like a build guide, because it's so expensive and difficult to craft a good crit talisman, it's very difficult to actually follow along in a build guide. Whereas something like this Jade Talisman, it's a very good talisman, but you can craft this for like 4 to 5 divines. The other portion of Jade Talisman, it has very low base attack speed, but Rampage and Walking Calamity do not scale on attack speed. We just want a little bit so that our initial cast time doesn't feel too bad. So Jade Talisman is just the perfect base. It has so much damage. The crafting process, again, just buy like a T2% Fizz 1. I think these cost about 2 divines. Hit it with Greater Essence of Abrasion, Dextral Crystallization with Perfect Essence of Abrasion, and then stick on Perfect Essence of Battle and Ananamu Desecrate for attack speed. The Ananamu Desecrate is not mandatory because, again, we don't really care about attack speed very much, but it's still just a very solid option for overall build fluidity. I kind of just lucked the Perfect Essence of Haste on for Onslaught because I didn't want to buy a bunch of Dextral Crystallizations. I just popped on a Haste into a Desecrate into Perfect Essence of Battle, and I got lucky and knocked off the third mod. If you want to do this deterministically and you have a bit more money, what you can do is, after you craft the prefixes, you exalt on one suffix, then you Dextral Crystallization with Perfect Essence of Haste, add another suffix, Dextral Crystallization, Perfect Essence of Battle. Hope it doesn't knock off the haste. If it does, you kind of have to cycle a couple times until you get both haste and battle on. And be careful, only 2 suffixes. You need the last suffix open. Once you have haste and battle on, then you desecrate the last suffix with Ananamu to get on the attack speed. If you exalt on all 3 suffixes, then of course your last Ananamu Desecrate has a chance of knocking off Haste or Battle instead, and the craft gets a lot more expensive and annoying. Flasks, Olroths, Mana Flask doesn't really matter very much. You just pop this every now and then after you pop Walking Calamity and Rampage because they cost a lot of mana. Freeze Charm for Utopia, for stuns, this is not necessary either. They're pretty cheap, but you don't really get stunned much on this build. And then a Rite of Passage. Now, there's a few different options you can take with Rite of Passage. I would say the primary ones are Spirit of the Ox, Spirit of the Bear, and Spirit of the Wolf. If you are scaling crit, you can go Spirit of the Cat, but that's incredibly expensive. Spirit of the Ox is by far the cheapest. It runs about 20 divines, while Bear runs 40 divines, and Wolf will cost you around 80 divines. Now, the main benefit of Wolf is that you get 15% movement speed, and movement speed is king, but it is very, very expensive, and the rest of the perks don't really help this build very much. We don't use skill speed very well because it doesn't scale our Walking Calamity or our Rampage. All it does is speed up the initial cast time by a little bit. Spirit of the Bear is pretty solid, and it's very thematic because we are playing Bear, and it just gives a ton of tankiness while you're mapping, 20% reduced damage taken, 20% increased max life, as well as some stun perks. I just felt that was an excess of defense because, again, I don't really take damage while mapping, so I elected to go for the cheapest option, which is Spirit of the Ox, which still gives some very strong defensive perks, increased elemental ailment threshold, armor, 20% reduced damage taken, but it also gives 50% reduced slowing potency of debuffs. And this enables us to have 100% reduced slowing potency of debuffs. We have 35% from this movement speed cluster right here. We've got 50% from Rite of Passage, which is essentially always up, and we have a little bit from this node right here, Unimpeded, which gives 24%. All told, we have 100%. If you do not have a From Nothing Resolute Technique, because I think they got a little bit expensive, then instead of running Unimpeded, you can just run a rune in your boots that gives 15%, and that will add up to a perfect 100% reduced penalty from slows. And this just means that you don't have to care about map mods at all. You can run temp chains, chilled ground, anything like that, and you will be running full speed. And I would argue that in terms of overall mapping speed, the ability to run temp chains maps without caring and without slowing down is really not that far off of the clear speed you would get out of the 15% movement speed from Rite of Passage Wolf. So I think Spirit of the Ox, very, very overlooked. It's one of the cheapest options, but I think it's one of the best for this build. Now, in terms of skill gem setup, most of it is unchanged. Maul, I haven't changed at all. I barely use Maul anymore because I'm just using my my Rampage for single target. The times where I use Maul is like if I open an Essence and I kill the rare, I know I'm going to have to pick up the Essence right after, so I don't really want to do the long animation to start up my Rampage, kill the rare, and then have to pick it up and start my Rampage again. So in scenarios like that, I'll just whack it with Maul once or twice and it'll die, pick up the Essence, and then I'll Rampage and be on my way. I did try out again the Bawtair's free setup within Maul, and the kind of main benefit of doing so, this is the meta way to run the Bawtair setup, is that you get to save a skill slot, you don't have to run Lunar Assault, and you can fit something else in. I just really didn't enjoy it. There were multiple problems with that setup. Number one, Maul has much shorter range than Lunar Assault, so you have to run all the way up to the monster, which is a little bit annoying. Number two, I do so much damage at this point that I'm like killing monsters. I was killing monsters with my Maul before they actually got frozen, even with freeze buildup and embitter and cold attunement. So sometimes I would have to go whack like 4 or 5 monsters in a row before I actually froze something and got the Bawtair's Vengeance up. And it was just really, really annoying. It broke up my flow while mapping. It just wasn't worth saving the skill slot. So I decided to just keep my original Maul setup and still use Lunar Assault for freeze buildup. This thing has over 600% more freeze buildup. You will freeze anything in one shot. It's just super nice, super convenient. Rampage, I'm running Efficiency 2, Close Combat 2, Burgeon 2, Momentum, and Rigwald's Ferocity. Rigwald's is a little bit expensive, it's like 5 divs, it is not necessary. Honestly, it does nothing, because instead of Rigwald's, you can just run Heavy Swing. Rigwald's gives 30% more attack damage, Heavy Swing gives 35% more melee fizz damage, and the vast majority of the damage on our Rampage is melee fizz. So you do not need Rigwald's, you can just run Heavy Swing. I just happen to have Rigwald's, and we have a bit of elemental damage coming in from Walking Calamity, from Bawtair's, so Rigwald's is technically a little bit better. Now, if you just want like maximum damage for bossing, if you are chaining Uber Zesh, if you are chaining Uber Arbiters, an interesting tech that you can use is Zerfi's Infamy. Zerfi's Infamy costs nothing, it's like 5 exalts. What this gem does is it causes Rampage to require glory to actually use, and you build this glory up with life spent on other skills. We have life tap on our Ferocious Roar, which we have to press before Rampage to build up rage and glory for Walking Calamity anyways. So as you can see, press this a few times, we get glory both for Walking Calamity and Rampage, and now this gets a gigantic multiplier of 50% more damage and 50% increased area of effect. Now, I do not run this on Rampage normally, because it's just too annoying while mapping to have to Warcry that many times each time you want to use your Rampage. Without the Zerfies in, you just pretty much Ferocious Roar once in a pack and you're at max rage, and you can Rampage after that. So it breaks up the flow while mapping too much. But if you're chaining Uber Arbiters, you don't need efficiency because you're killing him in a couple seconds anyways. So you might as well kind of just toss in Zerfi's Infamy. Uber Arbiter, T3 Zesh, they all have like 20-second cutscenes before you can actually do the boss. So you can get your Zerfi's Infamy stacked up, no problem. You only cast your Rampage once, so we don't really care about the glory cost after that, and you will have a gigantic damage multiplier. So I just keep this on my other setup small, and I can swap it in and out if I want to. To be honest, I never really do it because I kill bosses so fast anyways, but it's just nice to have that option. Walking Calamity, using Concentrated Area, Fire Pen, Elemental Armament, Prolonged Duration, and Deliberation. Fire Pen, of course, if you can afford Rakiatas, you can swap out for Rakiatas. I just didn't bother because, honestly, this isn't really that great anymore. The amount of damage that it does in single target scenarios is incomparably lower than Rampage. And I don't need any more damage on it for mapping because even if I took out like half of the supports, it would still one-shot packs for mapping. Right? So I didn't bother getting a Rakiatas, but if you have too much money to know what to do with, then you can absolutely pick up Rakiatas. Ferocious Roar is socketed with Life Tap, Cooldown Recovery 2. Honestly, this doesn't do anything, it's just for the green gem, so I can get Gem Enthusiast's movement speed. Raging Cry, Exposing Cry, and Enraged Warcry 2. Lunar Assault, socketed with Bauter's Vengeance, Prolonged Duration, Freeze, Rapid Attacks, and Close Combat. Pounce setup hasn't changed. Rapid Attacks, Mark for Death, Holy Descent, Mark of Siphoning, Brutus Brain. Again, for those who didn't watch the initial video, this makes your wolves like permanent and immune to damage, which means that whenever we pounce on a boss and proc Predator's Mark, we get 32% more damage to the boss because of Predator's Mark. Next, we have Scavenged Plating with Prolonged Duration and a bunch of assorted reservation supports, Cannibalism, Herbalism, Precision, Clarity. This is just because I had some Spirit left over and no slots left for an actual aura. The only important one here is Cannibalism. If you don't have Recover Life on Kill on like a Jewel, for example, then you really want it on Cannibalism for the life recovery when you're mapping. The other three are kind of just, they're nice to have, but they don't do that much. Herbalism is the best of the three because it scales up your Olrat's Guard, and then I would say Precision. You don't really need it because you're a melee build and you don't really miss in close range, but sometimes you're running map mods that have like monsters have higher evasion, and your Walking Calamity will kind of miss a little bit at the edge of your screen, so Precision helps with that, and then I just had some leftover Spirit for Clarity. Herald of Ice, Armor Explosion, Armor Break, Uruk Smelting, Magnified Area, Long Shot. We did end up dropping Overwhelming Presence for Berserk, and this is because we do so much damage now that we just don't need the extra stun threshold from Overwhelming Presence. Everything will get heavy stunned in like a second or less anyways. Berserk is entirely preferential. You do not need the damage. I think you kill Zesht like half a second slower without Berserk because of the damage reduction period. The reason I ended up keeping Berserk is because I found like this cool basic little trick to avoid the degen when I don't want it. The Berserk degen when you're at max rage is quite strong because we have so much max rage. You can see the degen is not very pleasant. When you're mapping, when you're in combat, this doesn't really matter because we have gain life on kill, we have life leech. But when you're like running between packs, you're waiting for a boss to phase in and it's doing its voice lines, the degen is quite annoying. And kind of the way that I found to circumvent that is to simply put Berserk only on your combat weapon set. And that way, when you Warcry, you go to your other weapon set, your Berserk's not active, so you're not degenning. To show this in practice, right, I pop Berserk, go to max rage, I'm degenning, it's pretty annoying. I hit Warcry, I'm no longer degenning because I don't have Berserk active in my Warcry weapon set. Lastly, we have Savage Fury. Again, this is still bugged. You just put it on your weapon set 1, and you can still cast it from your weapon set 2 without consuming any kind of spirit. So until this gets bug fixed, we can just keep making use of this feature. Lastly, we have our passive tree. There have not really been many significant changes to the passive tree. I kind of just ended up picking up all the rest of the movement speed. I would say the only significant change is I swapped up the Warcry weapon set and dropped off a little bit of Warcry speed and Warcry perks in order to pick up some glory generation right here and right here. And this just builds up our Walking Calamity faster, and if we are using the Xerfe's Infamy swap, then it builds up our glory for Rampage a little faster. With no monsters nearby, if we just Warcry, I think it takes 5 Warcries in order to get Walking Calamity up. And during mapping, it's like 2 Warcries you'll get Walking Calamity up if you have some monsters nearby. Do make sure that every single time you are going to cast Walking Calamity or your Rampage, you do something like a Warcry first. Because like Furious Slam, a lot of these bear skills have an attack speed penalty if you do cast them from when you're on all fours. And they're super, super slow. But a Warcry will stand you up. So you can see here, Warcry into Rampage, it is a noticeable amount faster, and you get the Warcry buff onto your actual Rampage. Empowered attacks snapshot onto Rampage, so if you have something like Ferocious Cry, you have something like Infernal Cry, Seismic Cry, all you need is one empowered attack. You use your Rampage, and the entire Rampage is going to be empowered. So any perks, if you get, like, for example, a Megalomaniac with some empowered attack perks, a really, really good example would be Cremating Cries, which is empowered attacks gain 15% of physical damage as extra fire. If you can get this on something like a Megalomaniac or an Anoint, this is very, very powerful because all of our Rampages are empowered. In terms of jewels, I have a Time Lost jewel over here. It's not really that mandatory. I'm looking to replace this with a Megalomaniac when I see a good one. I just haven't really seen any good Megalomaniacs with 2 useful mods for cheap. So I'm still using this Time Lost jewel for just a kind of irrelevant amount of damage, a little bit of increased effect of notable passive skills and radius, which increases our surrounded area of effect. Over here, I'm running a pure resistance against the darkness with 4% fire and cold. These are just really nice on Titan because this does get scaled by hulking form up to 6% fire and cold resistance per small passive. So we're getting 12% resistance per small passive. If you really need to cap out your resists, you can drop Gem Enthusiast or some damage and pick up these Armor to Ella nodes right here. And you can just get like 100% plus resistances off of this one jewel. Now, this is not mandatory. I'm actually like way overcapped on some of my resistances. So you could replace this with something that gives you like gain as extra damage. You could replace this with a Heart of the Well, but I kind of like experimenting with my build, swapping in and out different gear pieces and things like that. And it's very, very annoying having to deal with capping resists out and kind of playing that knife's edge of getting exactly 75% resistances. So I kind of keep it simple and just run a resist against the darkness to make it simple to do any kind of gear swaps. But if you're like a full min-maxer, you just want to squeeze every last ounce out of your build, then you can run something else in this slot. Lastly, we are running a From Nothing with Resolute Technique. This is not mandatory. Like, if you want to pick up this skill duration, you can literally just spend one travel node to pick it up. All this is really giving us is some life, some area of effect, and this one slow potency node. So, not mandatory. I think they kind of ballooned in price since I initially bought mine, but it is quite nice to have. Lastly, I do not actually have Overwhelming Strike allocated. It is really, really useless. Because I am non-crit. This is just from Anoint on my amulet, which again, I kind of messed up buying the amulet. I didn't notice it was sanctified, so I'm stuck with this. In reality, there's a lot of really, really good Anoints. I think some of the best ones are Perfect Opportunity, which gives damage with hits are lucky against heavy stunned enemies. There is Bashing Beast, which is enemies you heavy stun while shapeshift are intimidated for 6 seconds. Spirit of the Bear is a really, really nice, super cheap Anoint. 50% damage, 25% stun buildup. I think an amazing node, if you don't want to go for Spirit of the Ox, is Dryoct Cleansing, which gives channeled skills have 20% increased damage, and they remove a curse after channeling for 2 seconds. Rampage is, of course, a channeling ability, and this just means we can entirely ignore curses in maps. We just constantly cleanse them while we're rampaging around, so I think that's a fantastic utility node to pick up with either an Anoint or a Megalomaniac. I think that's about all. I'm sorry the video went on longer than intended. If you're still here, thank you for making it this far. I hope that you guys found this video helpful. If there's any questions, anything that I missed, you can of course ask in the comments. I try to respond to every comment. But yeah, I think that's about it for this build. Any further upgrades I make from this point will probably be fairly incremental and not really worth making a video about. So I'll see you guys in the next one. I don't really know what build I'm planning to play next yet, but we'll see when we get there.